So part 2 in taking the sample is making sure that you are sampling at the correct time. So the whole purpose of this post-harvest nitrate sample is we're trying to capture the amount of nitrogen that's been left behind after the crop has finished its production. So we're here in a cabbage field that has very recently been harvested. There's still a lot of residue left behind. Some heads are left behind, still sizing up. So harvest isn't 100% complete, but it is okay to take a post-harvest nitrate test, even in a field where harvest is not completed. More important than the field being completely harvested when you take the sample is that you are sampling at a time when the crop will not be taking nitrogen up in meaningful amounts. So close to harvest is good enough. We also want to make sure that we're not taking that sample too late into the fall after a lot of precipitation has taken place, as that's going to wash out a bunch of that nitrate from the depth where you're going to be taking your soil sample. So I'm in Delta right now on like a silty clay loam, so it's fairly fine textured soil. So the region and the soil type that you're dealing with is going to impact that timing of when you need to take the sample. I'm going to make sure I take the sample here before November 1st. I will provide a link in the caption below for information that you can find about other regions as well. Step 3, let's actually take a sample with this soil probe. So for a post-harvest nitrate sample, you want to sample to 30 centimeters of depth. And you can see with this ruler that works out to be right around here on this probe. So you want to make sure you have a probe that goes deep enough. And where you're taking that sample from, if it's in a field where you've broadcast nutrients previously, you can take samples here and there at random. The location doesn't really matter as much. If you have really clear banding of fertilizer that's taken place, you want to make sure that you're just not sampling directly into that band. So in this field, there was not any banding that took place, so I'm going to take my sample close-ish to the plant where I know some nutrients will have been taken up by the roots. And so I can see where the soil level is on my probe, and then I pull it out, and there we've got our 30 centimeter sample, and I'm going to put it into my bucket. So now that we've started our sampling, we've got one sample in the bucket here, but we are going to need to walk through the rest of the field and take multiple samples that we're going to mix together. And one of the reasons for that is because the lab needs a minimum amount of soil. Usually around 2 cups should be sufficient, but you can always contact the lab that you're using for their specifics. The other reason is that we want to get representation across this field. So usually the way that we do that is walking in a zigzag pattern throughout the field. I like to think of it as doing a Z or a W shape and planning to spread your samples out accordingly. Depends on the size of the field, but typically 15 to 30 separate samples is what you're going to be aiming for, minimum of 15 typically. And at the end of that, you're going to mix your samples well together inside the bucket. So let's take a few more samples and see what that looks like. So we've got a few more samples in there. I didn't quite take 15, but there's an example in there. So you can see how it looks a bit chunky. That's pretty standard, especially when you're using a probe. They'll come up in these sort of small coils. So what we need to do is make sure that this sample is mixed well so that all of those different samples are combined together. And when I was sampling, this wasn't so true for this field, but if there are any areas that aren't really representative of the field, so say there's a low spot or just an area that's doing poorly, you want to exclude that area. You can do a separate sample there if you would like to, but you don't want to necessarily include it in your main sample for that field. Now that the sample is a little better mixed up, we can put it into our collection container, which is this bag in this case, and I've already labeled the bag so that we know what field it came from, what depth we were sampling to, and the date we took the sample on. Close that up, and the next step is to make sure you clean out all of your equipment, especially if you're going to take another sample. So give this a wipe, give my probe a wipe, and then we're all set to take another sample. And under perfect circumstances, you'll take this to the lab same day. But if you can't take it same day, you can keep it in a fridge for up to 48 hours. And this is because this moist and warm soil is going to have an impact on the nitrogen in here, and we're actually going to have forms of nitrogen be transformed into nitrate, so it will skew our values if we don't do those steps. Make sure you don't freeze your sample though, you just want it to be refrigerated. Another option, if you aren't able to transport it to a lab near you in 48 hours after taking the sample, is you can lay this out to dry on pieces of paper, and you'll have an air-dried sample that you then send to the lab later. For more information, you can go to the website for the BC Ministry of Agriculture and Food, as well as consult with some of your local experts to better understand how to take the sample and also how to interpret the results.